Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As way of introduction, my name is Kevin Dainty. I work for the recruitment company Reed. I work in their technology division, running their senior appointments business. And the issue of diversity in the workplace is really important to us personally and professionally. It's the number one factor that all of our clients speak about when we go to talk to them about their recruitment challenges. To be fair, apart from it being an issue, it is really positive that it is the number one factor that most organisations are trying to improve about the way that they operate their businesses. So we're involved in quite a lot of things around improving diversity in the workplace, mainly trying to get more of the next generation into, for ourselves, tech careers. And we do that through a technology video hub. We've chosen inspiring role models that are working in technology. I'd love to talk to some of you guys about that later on after the call. We've also got a mentoring program to help individuals that are already on that journey to be the best they can. And then this type of content, events and consultation with our clients forms the third part of what we do. So the aim of today's session is to offer some really pragmatic advice around the ways that individuals can improve their situation, how organisations can better increase BAME representation in their businesses, but also to bring to light some of the issues which I guess are stopping those organisations from having that BAME representation at the leadership level. And like I said, even if we don't cover that today, we'd like to think that some of the topics raised today would help structure the content of our future sessions. So to aid us with that, we've set up a LinkedIn group. So if you can all access the chat function as part of this Teams call, there is a link there to that group. So anything that you think you'd like to see covered today that isn't, please make some comments in there. If you've got any resources or information you want to share that you think would help other people, use that as a place to share that and discuss things. But also in the chat function you'll see on the screen, we're using Slido today for the Q&A for the session. So if there's anything at any point you want to ask the panel about, then simply go there and enter the code 78132 to get access to the current questions and add your own. So thankfully I don't have to deliver that advice by myself today. I've got three fantastic speakers with me forming our panel. I'll give a brief introduction then pass over to them. So firstly we've got Shubhi Rajnsih, who's Digital Director and been working for the last 15 years in one of the UK's 10 largest organisations and has recently been awarded the 2020 WeQual Award for Technology, which is a leading diversity award. We've got David Germain, who is Group CIO of RSA Insurance, who is a £7 billion turnover organisation, people that don't know. And David also holds board level roles with other financial services companies as a non-exec director. And finally, we've got Sharon Pryor, who is another CIO. Blessed today to be joined by such esteemed people. Sharon has a background in organisations such as Ann Summers, the Post Office, where she set up their BAME network, and she's now recently taken steps to set up her own IT consultancy, which I know is something that some of our members today are quite keen to explore. So without further ado, I will pass over to our speakers. And firstly, if I could ask you, David, first to just give a brief description of how you've got to where you are today and any of the challenges that you faced on the way, mate.
Yeah, no, Kevin, thank you for having me on this event. I'd just like to say to everyone, please stay safe during this time. I hope your families are safe as well through what is a black swan moment again for this country. We just all have to be diligent at this point in time and hope you all get through it. And then we can have a reassess how the UK economy will start to grow again. So from me to you, all please stay safe and yeah, let's get going. So look, I look at my career and it's a bizarre career, right? I started at 16 and I started as an apprentice at 16 and I started working on mainframe solutions and developing on platforms like COBOL and Fortran. And I was an analyst developer and I sort of worked my way up through a number of organizations. And what I would say, what I found as a young apprentice and as a young person of color, we're going back 28 years now, the world was a little bit of a different place then. And I remember talking to my dad, and my dad said to me, you know, if you're going to get on in your career, you need to find an occupation and a discipline which no one will look at your creed and your color. They'll just look at your talent. And I said to my dad, does that mean I need to be in sport? do I need a big professional athlete, right? And he said, no. He said, you can do other things, but you need to let your talent shine through. And one of the things I loved with technology is no one cares about the color of code, right? If you can solve problems, if you're solution orientated, that's all anyone cares about at the top end of business. And I was very fortunate. I was a STEM guy. I loved maths, I loved sciences, I loved technology, and especially in the 90s, it was still coming through and emerging. And I excelled with problem solving and puzzles and quizzes and anything. I loved problem solving, but I was a very shy individual. I wasn't particularly a great communicator at that point. You wouldn't expect a 16, 18, 20-year-old to be. But you could give me problems and I would go away and figure out how to solve them. And then I'd see other people's code and I'd help them with their code, and they were probably 10 years older than me at the time. And development managers and project managers, program directors, head of change, head of delivery, when they were up against it, I would be the guy they would call and say, David, we've got a problem. We've got these issues that have come out of user acceptance testing. It's all very last minute. Can you have a look at what we could do with it? And I would be the guy they would bring in to a program or project at the back end of it. And I would fix the issue and allow that particular project to go live. And what I learned through that was my name started to get bounced around organizations, but no one actually knew what I looked like because I didn't have a particularly exotic name. And it wasn't until they met me that they thought, oh, it's a black guy, right? And they wouldn't say it, but there's a process it's called the look, and you get the look, right? And people saw beyond that pretty quickly if I could solve problems. So early in my career, I realized pretty quickly if I had talent for solving problems, it would get me opportunities in life. And if I was amenable and could get over my personal issues around communication and confidence, that would help me. I then found later in my career, I didn't always look like this, right? So I used to have dreadlocks down to my shoulders, believe it or not. In my early 20s, I had dreadlocks down to my shoulders. I was still into sport. I played a lot of rugby. And when I looked for my next role post my apprenticeship, what I found was nobody wanted to give me an opportunity. People looked at my physicality and my visuals rather than the content of my personality, how I communicated, how I presented myself. They couldn't get past the fact I had dreadlocks and an earring. And I had 14 interviews in a row, and I didn't get accepted for any of those jobs. And I would probably say 70% of those roles I could have easily have done, right? And I was doing with my current employer. And I remember my wife turning around to me, Tracy, and she was my girlfriend at the time, and she said to me, "Look, you need to cut your hair." And I went, "What do you mean?" She went, "You need to cut your hair." She went, "There's the perception issue here, and the perception of you is stopping individuals from hiring you." So I listened to her, and we hacked away at my hair. And the next interview I got the job. And that was a big moment for me because I realized pretty quickly society is tough. Society has a perception and a view on individuals, and if you don't conform to that view from society, it leaves you with less opportunities. And I realized that view for people of color, and it's still here today. It hasn't changed, right? Society has a view. We all have inherent prejudices, and my ask of people is to make sure that they don't bring those prejudices into the workplace, right? To create what I call an economic open society for everyone. And through my career, I've been given opportunities by individuals that don't hold deep-rooted prejudices. I've been given opportunities by individuals who understand cultural diversity. I've been given opportunities from individuals who really want to see an expression of confidence and an open environment and an equal meritocratic environment where everyone can come into the workplace, do their work, be the best they can be, and be given opportunities based on hard work, talent, and nothing else. And that's important. And I've taken that from probably my mid 20s into what I am now. And I make sure I build teams appropriately. I make sure my function is open and diverse. I make sure that we don't hold the wrong values, and we think about cultural traits of people, and we try to make sure that we take and we embrace all that into the workplace. And that's what I've learned through my career, through the opportunities I've been given. But I've also seen for want of a better word, when things go wrong, and what does that look like? Because it's happened to me personally, and how you have to maneuver around organizations to get the best out of them. But the key is, Kevin, is get good sponsorship, really do your research on the organizations you're going to join. I've always done my research on the firms I want to join. Make sure they're ready for a David Germain or a Kevin or a someone else before you join, because changing cultures, changing a systematic approach takes years. It won't be my generation. It won't be our generation, right? We're doing this now and we're building momentum and it's fantastic. And I will absolutely jump on that bandwagon and jump on that train and keep on pushing it. But it's probably 2 or 3 generations from now where it will become the norm. And what we're doing is disrupting the system, and we have to keep this positive energy and we have to keep this momentum to ensure it doesn't regress and move back. So, if I was to say to you the 3 things for me, it's think about, where you can add value. Always work hard working ethic. We've all got talent. Let's encourage it. Work with individuals who are like-minded, that want to open up, want to disrupt, and try and create a cultural diverse workforce, because I think that's where you get the best out of talent, and that's where you get the best out of organizations that win with the right, design thinking type mindset.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Shubhi, same question to you. If you give us a brief overview of the journey you've been on, and of course, any advice that you give for somebody that's looking to follow in your footsteps.
Sure, Kevin. So thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm really glad to share some of my experiences and hopefully they're of help. I mean, to me, a journey is about adventure and experience, and I see my professional journey as an adventure and experience, and the good and the bad which comes with that, I would say. So I started after my engineering in the IT services industries and in India, and I am Indian. I have done all my education in India, and at that time, it was the first time I entered the workforce, and I had to figure out very quickly how do I work with many different cultures, because the core thing about the Indian IT services is you are totally working in a global culture from day one, because all your clients are not necessarily in India. So very rapidly, I moved to the US with the same organization, and very rapidly, very early on in my career, I realized that the world wasn't the way I had looked at, growing up in India, where I was I understood everything really well, and I knew how parts fit together, and I needed to really relearn or unlearn some of the things I had picked up over the years, and specifically understand why there were what was a prejudice versus what was actually genuine feedback for my professional growth. And to me, making that distinction was really important really early on in my career. The other thing I realized was I wanted to play on the global scale. I didn't want to be working in one country in a sort of one type of area. And if I wanted to play in a global scale, I needed a little bit more skills of how I influence, manage stakeholders, how I present myself. And with that in mind, I pursued an MBA in change management, from which BP recruited me. So BP had a lovely program at that time, which encouraged having more diverse people join their talent pipeline, and they recruited me from India for their UK offices. So that was so for the first time, I also saw an organization taking an active interest in doing something different. And that meant to me that if I actually did my bit and chose, as David rightly said, the right organizations, I would be able to move in my career path. So BP, the first few years were a lot about experimenting different styles, seeing what would influence people. And I would really encourage that, because that gives you a sense of how different people react to you in different situations, and just finding ways to change your style from time to time, change how you're coming across from time to time, and having a toolkit or skill set of that is really helpful. Because trust me, it's not just about the organization you work with, it's about everybody you work with. And I'm sure in many of your roles, like me, you have stakeholders who are outside of the organization, just not in your organization. And you may see biases and prejudices coming from them as well to people who are your line or your senior management. So different styles, trying to see things and see the outcomes and doing it consciously. I think a big aha moment or eye-opening moment for me was when I was appointed the head of the exec office of the group CIO of BP, and I started working with the BP management, BP board members. And it was really eye-opening, because I could see that the senior management really cared about what they did in the organization. So it was really, again, down to how you convert it and how do you put yourself forward in that organization. But one thing which I learned personally there was I had a plan. I had an ambition, I had a plan, and I had done all the right things in, sort of saying what plan I should have. But what I didn't have was a dynamic plan. And as the environment and the opportunities changed around me, I suddenly felt, well, that might not work and that might not work. And that made me really worried about, was that because I was from a different background, or was that something which I had not done in my career planning? So I started thinking of a plan as something which changed and shift based on people I was working with, but still getting me to a final outcome which I wanted. And being open to that and not being on one path really allowed me to explore much more. Moving from that role, had I really did think purposefully about everything I did in my next few roles to get to the director position I wanted to get to. And it had two components. One was areas I knew, being self-aware, that I needed to develop, and that was fine. That was me saying to myself, hey, I need more of this. But more importantly, there is always a perception about you, especially like me, if you've been in an organization for many years, there's definitely a perception about what type of leader you are, what are your skill sets, good and bad. There is a perception about me, about you. And to me, the second was about how do I really challenge that perception, and do things which will change that perception. So putting my hand up for stuff which people would never think I would was really helpful. And pushing myself to do them was also quite helpful. Now, I wouldn't say that all perceptions were justified. Some of them I was really good at. It was just a perception that, the coming from an Indian background, Indian women may not want to, put her hand up for stuff. There were a lot of perception like that. But challenging those and saying, actually, no, I will not assume that you think that about me. I will actually ask you whether I can do something and see what you say. That really helped me get the right opportunities in the organization. And I was pleasantly surprised by the number of people who want to support you in something like that. So please never assume that there are people who will not support you because they don't understand you for some reason or the other. They still support you if they see a spark in you and they see a skill in you. And they see, and David again said this, hard work and performance in you. So using that, I've sort of gotten to the role I was in before I left BP. And to me, it's again a planned step to think about what is the next challenge, what is the next adventure I want to be. And the word adventure is really important because to me, there are four things which distinguish you sometimes in the organization. One is pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, being ready for anything. I have noticed many times that you take an opportunity to a person, and I have seen other people coming from backgrounds like me taking too long to think about it, right? While as others go, yes, why not? This is really good. I'm confident I'll get into it. So having that confidence that you can be pushed out of your comfort zone and being ready to answer quickly, I found that quite helpful. You do need to do right by people, and that from that I mean whether they are stakeholders, your team members, your line managers. If you do right by people and you are an ally to them, whatever their background might be, you will find that at some point or the other they will be an ally to you. So I always found that having those relationships and having those open conversations helped me quite a bit. One thing I also find important to do is taking accountability for your failures. A lot of time you're worried because you're already perceived as this person who might not be as good at her job as others think. So if I'm going to put my hand up and say, hey, I messed up or I had a failure, will that really put me back in my career? And I found that it had a different effect. It made people understand that I was confident and I wasn't insecure about how I was in the workplace. And finally, I'm going to say be proactive outside of your job role. And I don't mean please take more work on yourself unnecessarily. I think have opinions and have thoughts which are beyond your role. Because unless somebody sees you having a wider picture and having opinions, you will be in a box for maybe not your background, but definitely for your skill set. So, so I would say those are some of my learnings over the last 20 years or so. Kevin.
Thank you, Shubhi. Morning, Sharon. Could you please give our audience a quick overview of your background, your route to where you are today, and any additional bits of advice that you think would build upon what David and Shubhi have already mentioned?
Yeah, okay. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, first thing, I have to apologise for being late. I've sort of given the myth of how black people are always late, especially black women are always late, and here I am being late to this. So I really do apologise, but I had technical problems which are hopefully are now solved. So I unfortunately I didn't hear David's intro or the start of Shubhi's one, but I obviously understand what I need to do now. My background, I'm going to start right back in the very beginning of how I came to actually decide to go into IT. So both my parents came to the UK from Barbados. Barbados was a British colony. They both came to work in the late 60s and ended up working for the NHS. So my mum was a nurse, dad was a lab technician. And one of the things that they instilled in us 7 siblings was that we had to have a very strong work ethic, and that's what they instilled in us. And their message was very clear: you need to work twice as hard and be twice as good to get to where you need to be. And that was their motto. But academically, I wasn't great. You know, I left school at 17, barely scraping by with GCSEs, and went straight to work. And to be honest, with 7 children, my parents really didn't expect, or to be honest, want me to go to university. So I started work very young, started work in a very large bank. It actually ended up being HSBC, in a typing pool, so not in IT at all. Most of you are probably too young to know what a typing pool was, but it consisted of a team of typists with a supervisor, all women. And I remember one day, and I distinctly remember this day, I was sat at my typewriter one day and thought to myself, I want more. I didn't know what the more was, but when I looked around me in a room full of women, mainly middle-aged women, I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I'm a firm believer in the power of positive thinking, and the chain of events that then followed and allowed me to embark on my IT career was really phenomenal, really. It started with me seeing an opportunity. And the opportunity I saw was really from an IT guy that used to come into the head office from head office every week and perform backups and routine maintenance routines. And one day he was going on extended leave, and I just saw the opportunity and asked my branch manager, who saw how enthusiastic I was when I was sat speaking to this IT guy, whether I could perform the tasks while the IT guy was on holiday. So he trained me for a few days, and I did it. And then I asked my manager again whether I could train to become a network engineer to save costs, because we were paying third parties to come in when there was an issue. So then I became a certified network engineer. And that actually taught me a very good lesson very early on. And the first lesson is always look for opportunities, you know, never be afraid to find an opportunity. And the second learning was you need sponsors at senior levels. And sponsorship at senior levels has seen me through, I think, my career to date. And these are the people who are talking about you when you're not in the room, when they're in the boardroom or when they're in senior meetings. They're the people that are sponsoring you. And that's actually how I worked my way through several roles in various organisations, including the Bank of England, before embarking on an 11-year career with GlaxoSmithKline. And GlaxoSmithKline was really the place where I built my foundation, and certainly working across international organizations, but really around disciplines such as business analysis, Six Sigma process improvement, project management, business transformation. These are all the things I cut my teeth on at Glaxo, and it really helped because they were a really process-driven organization. But again, sponsorship was key for me in how I progressed my career. I started my career there as an IT consultant and ended it as a regional director for Central and Eastern Europe. And I did that through sponsorship of some very senior leaders, including the guy that ended up being the CEO for Glaxo, and my immediate regional president. They all sponsored me in projects, and going into doing projects that no one else wants to do is sometimes a risky strategy, because it can either go really well or it can go really horribly wrong. But you need to have the sponsors behind you to support you in taking those risks. They also sponsored me in embarking on further education. So I completed a number of degrees while I was at Glaxo, including a master's in law and an MBA, all whilst working full-time, traveling extensively, and being a mum. But I left Glaxo around 15 years ago, and having worked in several companies since, always at strategic level, either as a CIO or directing an IT function at group or regional level. I'm now currently running my own technology consultancy, and I'm working on really doing significant business transformation programs, specifically focusing on digital and data strategy. But as I said, the biggest piece of advice I can give is really about not being afraid to take on the big projects and ensuring you have sponsorship. Everyone understands the value of having mentors, but you really do need to have sponsorships, because in my early career, I was acutely aware that I was the only person in the room normally, but not necessarily from an ethnic point of view. It was really from a gender. The ethnic issue didn't really surface for me until later on in my career. But as a woman, I was in competition against men. I was almost always the only woman in the room. But what got me into the boardroom was my inherent belief and my incredibly inquisitive mind. And I never believed I couldn't do it. So I always focused on the outcome, always focused on continuous improvement, and always focused on ensuring I had the right sponsorship behind me.
Excellent. Thank you, Sharon. A question for you all now. So one of the big things that I see, obviously, is because of the lack of BAME individuals in certain organisations, sometimes people feel alone in that role, and they might want to increase representation across the business, but don't know how to go about that. When their voice is probably in quite a low position in the organisation. Do you have any advice for those kind of individuals as to how to, encourage their organisation to do more in this area?
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, most organisations have some form of diversity community or committee set up. That's what I found in the last probably decade plus. And I would encourage anyone who is representing the BAME community to reach out to these diverse committees, join, understand the principles of those committees, what they're trying to achieve. Most are trying to achieve some level of distribution of seniority appointments in grades that's distributed proportionally across the company moving forward. To Sharon's point, equal opportunities for the right assignments in the organisations are made clear. It's not just about becoming a NED or being on the board or being on the ExCo. It has to be around sort of the middle management grounds and ensuring there's the appropriate distribution of opportunities for everyone as well. And the recruitment, the search firms and the organisations you use to bring in new talent, making sure that's a fair and open forum and opportunity for everyone as well. So the measurement of that's important. I think individuals that are coming into these organisations need to really have a good view on diversity, ethnicity, culture, society, how the organisation makes decisions, how you get promoted through the organisation. To Sharon's point, to Shubhi's point around sponsorship, mentoring, you need to make sure all these things are there, especially if you're a person of colour, especially if you're a diverse candidate. It becomes even more important, because I'm still going to say the same thing, right? Society hasn't changed that much. 28 years ago, I started as a 16-year-old. I was the only black person. 28 years later, I still feel like I'm the only black person in some of the companies I work at. Just being true and honest, right? So how do you make sure the fabric of organizations, institutions, society is changing? You have to force that change, and you have to make sure these committees are set up and they're just not there to tick a box. they're really driving and disrupting the organization to continuously improve think about how does it improve the employees' lives, especially employees that are coming from a more diverse background.
Kevin, if I may add to what David said, I agree with what he said. One of the things which I at least found helpful, and I was sometimes the only Indian, woman leader in people conversations, whether they were about recruitment, potential, performance, talent management. And one of the things I found quite helpful was that when people were discussing people in the moment, if you ask them, what do you really mean when you say somebody so-and-so doesn't have a leadership edge, for example, which is one of the very common things I heard, they don't have a leadership edge. They can't really connect with people. And I would normally say, okay, please describe that to me as to what qualitatively you are looking for, because those terms can always apply to, can be a mirror for, sort of a barrier to whatever bias they have, unconscious bias maybe they have in their mind. And that challenging in the moment really helped, because slowly people knew that if I was in the room, they had to think through what they were actually pushing forward and think more deeply than coming up with generic terms which are probably coming from a bias. So just at a practical, if you find yourself in a position in those conversations, use that platform to question some of these things at the ground level, is what I would say.
Okay, I'll add to both of you on those points. I think it's absolutely critical that it is actually recognised that there is going to be a minority element to having BAME or ethnic representation within organisations. My advice would be, and started at an organisation I worked at, was don't be afraid to talk openly about race. One of the obvious issues I think that people have with race on all sides is there is a element of people treading on eggshells because they don't know what the right thing to say is, and there is a fear that they're going to be politically incorrect if they say the wrong thing. And what I realized is that certainly at exec level, almost none of my colleagues ever socialized outside of work with ethnic minorities. And so there was always this difficulty of really understanding and being empathetic with cultural differences that people have. So my drive was always to make people feel really open about race. So I've always talked about my background. I always talk about my family. I always talk about some of our cultural nuances, like being late. So these are things I think that are quite important. And certainly, if you're a ethnic employee in a hiring position, don't be afraid to hire someone from a different ethnic grouping. I've heard some of my ethnic colleagues say, well, if I hire this person and they're black, it may seem that I'm, exercising nepotism, and they'll be accused of nepotism. So they go in the opposite direction because they don't want that label. But, I think we need to be more open about race in the workplace. It's inevitable. Living and working in the UK, we are going to be in a minority. The country is a majority white, and we just have to accept that. So the view that we have to have a certain level of representation across an organisation is where the challenge will come in. But my advice really is, let's just talk openly about race, and we can come on to what organisations themselves can do to make a difference.
Yeah, so it's a good segue, that, Sharon. So I was going to ask the next question, which is, we've looked at it from the BAME person, the business's perspective, what they can do. But what do you think the businesses should be doing from the top down to improve the situation for those individuals?
Shall I go? Or
yeah, I can go. Or you can go, Sharon.
I think it starts with understanding the makeup of your organisation. There has been a difference of opinion on whether people should have metrics and measures in place for recruitment. It started really with gender. So there was a huge push 25 years ago to get more women into the boardroom. And now there's a huge push on diversity in general. And now we're talking specifically about ethnic differences. Now, unless an organization knows how their employees are made up across the different levels, it's very difficult to know whether or not there's a problem. When you start, and I'm an advocate of data, you know, I love data analytics, and I believe data gives you insights into the way an organization runs. And if you see certain trends happening in a specific area of the business, you can delve in and say, you know, is it a problem with this particular recruiting leader, or is it a problem with the organisation itself? They're not attracting the right level of candidates. So absolutely, it has to start with getting the data. The second piece of advice would be unconscious bias training. People do not know that they're biased, and that's the reason why unconscious is in there first. It's very difficult to say to someone that you're not recruiting someone from an ethnic minority simply because they are from an ethnic minority, because they don't believe that that's what they're doing. But their preference is to hire someone that they like, hire someone that they get on with. And invariably, because they don't socialize with ethnic minorities outside of work, they don't really know, you know, whether or not they would get on with someone who's completely the opposite from them. So I think unconscious bias is absolutely key to helping people understand where they may or may not have biases in recruiting or promotional decisions.
Thank you, Sharon. I think before we move on to David and Shubhi, there's a point there that I want to pick up on, because it's one of the questions on the Q&A, which is around the measuring of diversity. And I think that each and every one of us has an important part to play in that, because companies can only do so much in trying to measure it. If people aren't willing to share that data, then it's hard to fix. You know, there's lots of places for organizations to hide. So what we need is, you know, when you are faced with some D&I questionnaires, and when you're applying for jobs, when you're going for promotions, please complete them. You know, they're not used in any way to discriminate against you. They're used to be able to hold people to account, so that we can see at every stage of the process where the failings are. You know, as a recruiter, you know, is your challenge that you're not engaging a diverse audience? Is your challenge that you've got the audience, but you're not giving them a fair chance? Is your challenge that you're giving them a fair chance of getting an interview, but then there's bias in the interview process? You know, we need that transparency around what's happening to be able to fix things. So that's my one piece of advice as for the individuals, is to, you know, partake openly in those kind of questionnaires. David, Shubhi, any more advice around what organizations can do?
So I think one thing I would like to add to what Sharon and you've already said, I think looking at your HR processes, talent, performance, recruitment, all of them, not just recruitment, is really important to look at what your talent pipeline and how you can promote diversity. There are two aspects which I find are really important maybe for organizations. One is all of those processes are derived from the values and the ethos you project in your organization. So you really need to take a step back and look at the bigger overarching framework those processes are actually working in. So you look at whether your values are geared in that way, whether your ethos is geared in that way, and culturally, are you set up right to actually have the right processes? Because having a lot of lag indicators around percentages, etc., is great, but you haven't really looked at what your lead indicators are unless you look at it overall. The other is, and Sharon touched on it, is inclusion. And to me, that is about holding your managers and holding your team leads accountable for creating an inclusive environment and actually measuring them on that. Because I feel many times they will meet the percentage, but then that one person is sitting on their own thinking, what do I do with my career next? Now that I'm here. And creating an inclusive environment to me is really much more important than, you know, worrying about the metrics and the numbers, and holding people to account to do that is something which you speak about it, but you don't really say, okay, what did you really achieve in doing so? So I think those would be the two additions I would make.
Thank you, Shubhi. David, anything to add?
No, I think Sharon and Shubhi have done a great job there. I would only add one more point, which is, and I like what Sharon said earlier about her early career working at Glaxo. I spent a big part of my career at a company called GE, and I chose that organisation because it builds leaders. And I wasn't a leader up until I got to that point. I was a good delivery guy, but I wasn't a leader, which is very different. And building leadership credentials is thinking about all aspects of a business, especially in technology, but it's really thinking about people. Right? I've always said to everyone, 80% of my job is people. It's as simple as that, right? If my people aren't delivering, aren't successful, aren't inspired, aren't motivated, don't feel they've got a career path, I'm not doing my job. But when you build leadership credentials, you have to think about all aspects, all dynamics. You have to think about culture. You have to think about society. You have to think about economics, global distribution. You have to think about all aspects of leadership to build a great team. And I think one of the things that I think has been missing since my time at GE for the firms I've worked at and the firms I've seen is that leadership erosion over time. Leaders now, we talk about unconscious biasness. There is a lot of that, unfortunately. I still see a lot of that, right? When you build teams, when you build functions, you have to take a different view. What are you trying to achieve? What's the outcome? What's the overall outcome? How does a company win in the markets it serves? And I think companies do better. Companies win because they build diverse, culturally enlightened workforces that cover a myriad of spectrums in society. I think if you bring that together and that fusion together, you get a real richness that you won't get if you just take one lens. So, leadership for me is a big criteria around organizations winning, but somewhere from what I've seen in recent times, specifically in the last decade, we've sort of lost the leadership credentials. So there needs to be something brought back into the workforce again to start building that back up.
Yeah, thank you, David. So there's a common theme here in some of the questions, and you've all mentioned it around unconscious bias. So, from my perspective, I would say that throughout my career, I've at some points when making decisions, used some kind of unconscious bias, hiring people that look like me, have the same interests as me. People that don't support Manchester United for a start is a good one. But it's not always that the person is guilty of something. They're not always prejudiced. They're not always racist. It's just unconscious. So when you as an individual recognise somebody is demonstrating unconscious bias, they're obviously hiring people that fit the mould. How, without putting yourself in a difficult position, can you call it out? What's the best way, do you think, for an individual to raise that in the organisation?
I mean, I would, Kevin, call it out every time, right? Because I think people in general, as you said, don't want to do something which it's unconscious. So unless you tell them about it, how are they going to know? Because they'll just keep doing it. I mean, the word in itself gives the clue, right? So so I would always sort of call it out, but I would also do it thinking about the relationship I have with them. Is it truly unconscious bias, or is it actually genuine feedback? And sometimes I do find people in their mind make themselves the victim and assume something is an unconscious bias. So just be very careful about whether in your relationship or what you're hearing is truly unconscious bias, or is there a genuine concern somebody might have due to other observations. But till you have that conversation, you're not going to know. So have that conversation.
Thanks, Shubhi. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think I would add on to what Shubhi said. You do need to have the open conversation. I guess part of the issue with recruitment is someone has to make a decision, and sometimes the decision there has to be an element of subjectivity. And it's what makes up that subjectivity that is the issue. Objectively, you can see whether someone has the right qualifications, whether they have the right experience, whether they'll have the right educational background for what you're potentially looking for. But when you start to look at things like cultural fit, that's when you start to get into the grey area. And when you ask the questions, will this person fit within the organisation? Will this person fit within my team? And then you start questioning, what does fit mean? It's very hard for someone to then articulate what they mean. And quite often it's whether or not they like the candidate, whether they can go for a beer with the candidate or talk about not Manchester United, Tottenham, with their colleagues. So, these are really important aspects of when you're choosing to hire someone or promote someone to work with you. And the only real way to ensure there is a balance is to ensure that the decision making is done by a group rather than an individual. So you start to build out hiring panels or promotion panels for certain levels within an organisation. That's the only real true way you can see that someone isn't just favouring one type of recruitment style over another. That's my view.
Yeah, I think the one thing from a recruiter's perspective that I'd say is my piece of advice when looking at that, making hiring decisions, is to really drill down on what are the core values of your organisation and how do you demonstrate those core values, because we're all going to have different interests, we're all going to have different backgrounds, but fundamentally, it's those inherent values that drive the way that you make decisions, drive the way that you engage with your customer, and if you can define and find, it's difficult, find a way of during the interview process, calling out those core values and seeing if people do truly resonate with your business. That's how you're going to get that cultural fit without it being based on skin color, ethnicity, gender. There's an interesting question here, and I don't know if it's something you've experienced or not, David, in your career. I know that Shubhi, when we spoke yesterday, mentioned that she had working in an organisation for a long time. It's sometimes hard to shift that perception of what you do and what you stand for. So when you take a promotion, how do you go about getting that due respect that comes with that new job title and that new responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great question, and look, I was really fortunate. Because I started my career pretty similar to Sharon. I started at 16. I was promoted young through many assignments, and I made CIO at 27, nearly 20 years ago. At GE, actually, they gave me my first opportunity, so I'm very respectful of it. But when you're 27, you don't know a lot, right? And you're working with people, you've got functions of 500 to 1,000 people that you're leading, who are all older than you, who've got a lot more experience than you. You just have to respect that. And what I stand for is integrity. What I stand for is an open and honest environment. What I stand for is collaboration. And there's nothing wrong in standing up and saying, I don't understand that. Someone's going to have to educate me on that process. Someone's going to have to educate me on that program. Someone's going to have to explain to me, how does that business case work? I still do it now, right? So I can't, being a leader doesn't necessarily mean you know all aspects of everything in the business all the time and you're the guru. What it's about is leading teams, leading functions, bringing in the right talent, allowing people to excel, building autonomy, trust, all that good stuff. And I think if you take the job, and specifically the next level down that you have to lead, because you can lead thousands of people. The realization is you're leading your direct reports. If anyone thinks they're really leading thousands of people, you're not, right? They're leading thousands of people. If you can work with your leadership team and build trust and honesty and openness, and you respect them for what they bring, but they'll start to respect you for what you bring to the table as well. And I think you can only do that over time. Now, I'm very fortunate. I've had this long tenured career. I'm relatively well known in the industry. I can go and talk to other organizations. I can go and move around our organization, and you sort of get a level of respect now because people like to see long tenure, right? Long tenure leads to many organizations. You've been a CIO in that job, you get some market news about you. People love all that stuff. But the realization is you build that profile and that brand, that's fantastic, because hopefully that will help other people. But you still got to do the job, right? And you still got to demonstrate assignment by assignment, your credibility, your delivery track record, and you've got the job done. And I think, staff, employees, people you work with absolutely respect that. And the key is to make sure you keep on doing it. The minute you stop, you'll lose that trust, and you'll start to drink the Kool-Aid and just assume you're some godlike figure in an organization. And the realization is you have to stay grounded, and you have to maintain a level of cadence with the teams around you and continuously build that respect and trust.
Thank you, David. I think, Shubhi, the extreme example we mentioned yesterday was being the only female in the boardroom and getting asked to take the minutes. How do you avoid that happening?
Well, I think I would say through open conversations. And sometimes what at least I found, because I worked for a lot of years in the same organization, there were people who I started out with who were sort of my mentors, etc. And later on, they became peers or they became people working for me, right? And that sort of changes that dynamics of the relationship you have built earlier on. Doesn't really just change because your job title has changed, because that's the type of relationship you have with somebody. So I think it's very important to address something like that with respect and say, okay, why do you feel that that is the most value added activity I can do in this particular construct? Is this the best thing for me to be, does this help me in my skills, or does this help the organization in achieving what they want to? And sometimes you have to ask those open-ended questions to people when you repeatedly see a certain behavior. I would ignore if it was like once or twice, or unless it was really prejudiced. I would think about, whether it's because they are in a habit of doing that. So do I need to always correct and be on it? But do it a second time, and I think there's an open conversation which needs to happen in a respectful way, and with open-ended questions and exploring why somebody might have done it. Now, you may choose to do that in the meeting, because that does mean that everybody else who's picked up that cue will also see the outcome of that conversation. Or depending on your relationship, you might choose to do it outside, but then always have a conversation about how that's going to get addressed to the bigger group now, right? Because everybody who has seen somebody do that to you assumes that's okay to do if you haven't said anything in the meeting. So if you want to have it outside and that's what you're more comfortable with, do it, but find a way to address it with the bigger group. And I did have somebody who went back and said, well, Shubhi brought up an important point, and it was more about the thing I faced was really about I was making a point, and every time I made a point, somebody else stood up to explain it, and I was really uncomfortable. It was my first leadership meeting at a senior level, and I was really uncomfortable saying something right then and there, right? Because I wasn't sure what's happening, what's the dynamics. So I went outside and said that to my to the leader of the meeting and manager, and I said, well, I did feel people were thinking for me in that meeting, and I am very well versed of explaining it. So how do we address that? And right in the next meeting, we had a conversation about it in terms of how I felt being part of that group, and have an indicator to say, hey, I need help. Can you help me think through this? Versus, hey, I have an idea. Can you give me inputs on it? And that really helped, and that set the tone for many years to come, I would say, me doing that. But I didn't do it in the meeting. I just found a way to bring it back into the meeting.
Excellent. Thank you, Shubhi. David, I'm very conscious of time. Do we need to release you for your board meeting?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time. All the best, everyone.
Thank you.
Soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, there's a couple more questions.
Can I just add on that point? I'm sorry, I've got an echo somewhere. So the point about promotions. When I was at Glaxo, I went through two major promotions there. Firstly, from a project manager, and then to my first IT director role. And I remember some feedback one of my mentors gave me after they sat in a meeting with me. They came out and they said, you've now got this promotion, Sharon. Your promotion is due to not what you do, but how you think. When you go into a meeting, you need to exhibit how you think rather than explain what you're doing. And it actually made me realize that there is an element of imposter syndrome you get when you're suddenly put into a position of senior responsibility. Women specifically have this as an issue, but it's also in ethnic groups as well. But specifically, you feel that you're not really meant to be there, and that you're an imposter somehow, and that someone's going to find you out because you don't know everything, and you start to question yourself. And so the issue of moving from one level in the organisation, being promoted further up, is really about how you see yourself. So I've always now, most of my career progression was done at Glaxo, but that taught me a very valuable lesson, that I needed to be able to see that I had a seat around the table, and I had earned my place to be there. I didn't know everything, and I admitted when I didn't know everything, but I had a right to be there, and that's the way I went through my promotions at GSK.
Excellent. Thank you, Sharon.
Kevin, if I may share a very simple trick somebody shared with me, and it may or may not work for people, but I will share it nevertheless. If you feel constantly that you are in conversations where you are sidelined or you are not able to make your point, try going early into the meeting and sitting in the middle of the room as opposed to on the sides of the room. And I did notice that with a lot of people, they will come to almost at the end, sit in the end, and then it's absolutely impossible, specifically big meetings. Now, the virtual world has leveled the playing field a little bit, which is great. But if you are in a face-to-face conversation, then that's a trip which really worked for really important big meetings for at least me. So I thought I'll share it.
Thank you, Shubhi. Shubhi, I don't know if you're positioned to answer this question or not, but somebody has asked, obviously with senior roles requiring lots of stakeholder engagement and communication skills being probably the two main factors that you need, how would you think that you would deal with that as somebody coming from outside of the UK, English is a second language? How do you overcome those kind of barriers?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer it in a funny way first, Kevin, and then try it out, because a lot of people do believe that English is my second language, but actually it's not, because I've done all my education in English.
Yeah.
What is a problem sometimes, and when I definitely came into the country, was accent. And do I need to change it? Because sometimes people would say, we don't understand you, or you go too fast, and I do go too fast. So to me, that's the problem I really faced. And I will have to say I'm still learning, and I can still, when I'm excited and I'm passionate, I go at speed. And at times, I have found that what I do is I set the scene. Sometimes I would say that, hey, we're in this conversation, and do know that I do have a tendency of going fast when I'm really passionate about it. I also think that you shouldn't apologize for the way you are coming across, because that is what you are. And if people are saying we don't understand you, or you can see from their faces they don't get it, pause and ask them, are you with me? Can I go slowly for you? Instead of them making judgments about you, take it, tackle it more directly and sort of say, hey, it's not my first language. Can I, do a better job explaining it? Can I use some visual aids to draw something up and help you understand my point? And I would highly recommend it, because then that becomes your style, and slowly you'll find that people just accept it as how you work. So I would say embrace it. Don't feel worried about it. Don't feel you have to do something. I mean, you've grown up in speaking in one language. It's not going to happen overnight. You're not suddenly going to be speaking like everybody else. So I would say embrace it, and make sure that where you feel that that's causing an issue, you address it in a nice way and say, hey, understand you guys can't get what I'm saying. I'm going too fast. Can I slow down for you? Or do you want to ask me questions? Can I draw something? And that definitely helped me, at least initially, till it became second nature almost to do that sometimes.
Excellent. And a question I'll direct at you, Sharon, because this isn't all about people wanting to work for somebody else. There's lots of individuals probably on this call who have aspirations, setting up their own business, and that's something that you've done. Would you have any advice for somebody as a member of the BAME community looking to do that?
Yeah, sure. I'm not a natural entrepreneur at all. I love the corporate life. I love the security of knowing my salary is going to be paid at the end of the month. The challenge with setting up your own business is you absolutely have to believe in what you're doing. And this isn't about being from a BAME background or an ethnic background. This is really about how you feel about yourself, how confident you feel about your ability to run your own business. If you have your idea and you feel passionate about it, then always go for it. There is always going to be some level of unconscious bias with people who are going to be buying your product or service. That just exists in the world. But your belief in your product. I mean, I like reading up biographies around entrepreneurs, how people get ideas, how businesses get started. Once you have a great idea, you almost have to forget about the fact you're either a woman or you're ethnic, or you've got an issue with gender identity, or whatever it could be, whatever the diversity element that you're struggling with. You have to forget about that. You have to focus in on what is it I'm trying to achieve with this new business, and how much do I believe in it. Once you have the belief, you almost set out the intention ahead of you around how you then go about realizing that belief. And, you know, there are practical things you need to do around setting up the business, around getting an accountant, you know, building out a website, having a stream of opportunities that are down the road for you. But those are, you know, the mechanisms. But it has to start with your own belief about yourself.
Excellent, thank you. Now, there's a couple of other questions which are quite meaty. I think they probably warrant having their own session on to get to the bottom of them, to be honest. The first one, which we could probably get your views on, though, is around the terminology BAME. Obviously, we've used that today, but some people could see that as quite problematic. What are your thoughts about using that acronym as a catch-all?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, we've had this conversation over the last couple of days. You know, BAME initially started as an acronym for Black, Asian, Ethnic Minorities, minority ethics, sorry, even I got it wrong. But then BAME has now become almost like an identity for a group of people that are being bundled together without really understanding the differences between them all. Even blacks, you know, Black African and Black Caribbean and Black American, Black British are different cultures. Really, really different ethnic groupings, different racial issues. So to bundle people under BAME, it almost loses the differences that exist. I personally, you know, don't have an issue with it because I like to look past a name and look at a meaning. But you know, people prefer the word ethnic or racial rather than BAME, then so be it. But it is what it, you know, call a rose by any other name is my view.
Thanks, Sharon. Anything, Shubhi?
I agree with Sharon. I mean, I don't really fixate on a name that much. It's the intent of it which is important to me. I do think that if it is misused in any way, then you see that, then I would question it. But I think if it is being used with positive intent, I think the intent behind how it's being used is really important. If it is if it's being used to discriminate in some other way, then yes, or group too many things and make generic, you know, suggestions about so many different cultures and ethnicities. I think then I wouldn't feel comfortable in that type of a conversation. But if the intent is clear and positive, I'm happy to. I don't really feel sort of passionate about the word itself.
Lovely, thank you. Well, thank you guys. We've had some great feedback already from people in the chat, and I'm sure that will continue. I think the most important thing is that this is the starting point of this conversation, not the end of it. So what we've done is we've created a LinkedIn group, which I will share the link to. I'll email everyone that's participated in this session, and I'll put it in the comments when we host this on YouTube so that everyone can access that. And the view is that that's going to be a working group where, you know, people can raise these topics, you know, any of the media subjects that they think that warrant their own 1 hour session or workshop to go through. You know, please bring those ideas, please bring those challenges to the table, and amongst the community that we've got here, we can hopefully solve some of them. But well, thanks again for your time, Sharon, Shubhi, and obviously Dave that's already left. Unless there's anything else you'd like to add, then I'll wrap up for the day and let you crack on.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you for organizing this. I really loved, you know, sharing, and I can see from the comments people enjoyed the session as well. So thank you. And some of the questions which were posted earlier really helped us prepare as well. So thank you for that as well to the audience.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Shubhi.
Again, thank you. I'll add my thanks there, and as well to David and Shubhi. You know, and the participants on the call as well. You know, thank you very much for participating and answering the questions. And please do reach out to any one of us if you want to have a private conversation about specific issues that you're facing now, or you want some direction. You know, by all means, I'm on LinkedIn, so please do reach out.
Yeah, so am I. I'm happy for you to reach out.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Thank you for the audience. All have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.